Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Lions Grid. Back at you today, taking a look at our injury roundup and roster transactions report here for heading into week 3. Of course, today is Thursday night, so there is a football game this evening. And Joe, I think that's a perfect place for us to start. Mind you, we do our main pick'em segment on Saturdays, but because the game is tonight, and that happens before Saturday, let's go ahead and throw up here who we're taking in tonight's game. We're both going with the Titans in tonight's Thursday night matchup between the Titans and the Jaguars. And Joe, obviously, taking a look at the injuries in that game, Gardner Minshew again will be starting this week because Nick Foles is still recovering from that broken clavicle injury. I believe they placed him on IR, so we're not going to see him until at least after week 9. If he's ready to go at all this season. So the rookie will again be getting the start there for the Jaguars. And then the only other, I guess there's two other injuries. One that might actually impact play, and that's cornerback A.J. Boye for the Jaguars. He's dealing with a hip injury. I believe he was listed as questionable heading into tonight's game, but according to Ian Rappaport, he has a good shot of playing in tonight's game. So you see him in the secondary. Of course, Jalen Ramsey, despite the potential trade happening there, will also be active tonight. And then on the Tennessee side of things, the only sort of minor injury they had was Marcus Mariota did make an appearance on the injury report earlier this week with a minor quad issue, but should be a go tonight. So, Joe, we're both going with the Titans. I think... What are your thoughts about tonight's Thursday night matchup?
I think that, looking at some of the players that Jacksonville has, they have a lot of playmakers on defense. So it's going to be a little bit more of a chore to move the ball offensively if you're the Titans. But on the same token, I do believe that the Titans are going to have more offensive production than the Jacksonville offense because you got a rookie quarterback making his first ever start, or maybe not his first ever, but I have not heard of him until today. Until I just listened to a little bit of NFL talk earlier on today, and they were talking about the rookie quarterback. So he's going to be evaluated, and pressure is going to be put on him to make plays. So being thrown into action, not having a lot of hype about that player particularly. It's going to be interesting to see how he does at the helm of the Jacksonville's offense. But I think their defense can keep them in the game. And that being said, Tennessee, I think they're missing Wesley Woodyard tonight too, linebacker. So that might cause some problems. He's been a pretty good linebacker throughout the course of his career, and just missing him. And their defense, I think, can contain Jacksonville's offense, and I think that we'll have enough plays from Tennessee on offense with Derrick Henry, a couple wide receivers, and Delaney Walker and Marcus Mariota making plays. I see Tennessee, coming out and winning. Closer game than what some people might expect. You would say 20-10. I'd say within one score.
Yeah, these are two division rivals, so I would expect a pretty close game here. Obviously, both teams in the AFC South, so this is a pretty important game for both teams. The Titans looked pretty good in Week 1 against the Browns, and then last week against the Colts, we both had them picked in that, and they let us down unfortunately there in pick'em. But I think overall, just looking between the two teams, I think both teams realistically have a shot of winning the game. The reason I'm going with Tennessee over Jacksonville is just Jacksonville, they have everything going on with Jalen Ramsey. Last week there was the altercation between him and head coach Doug Marrone on the sideline, and they also had all those penalties in week 1 where Miles Jack, I think it was, got ejected from the game for punching somebody. It seems like there's a lot of chaos currently going on the Jacksonville sideline. So with that, I think with both teams being pretty evenly matched, I'm going to go with the team where I haven't seen quite as much craziness on the sideline. So I'm gonna play it safe and go with the Titans because I haven't. There's been just so much going on with Jacksonville lately that it just seems like they're a little dysfunctional. So what we're going to do now is to help navigate, because there have been quite a few injuries. What we're going to do is just sort of walk through each of these games that are scheduled for Sunday and talk about some of the key injuries for each of the teams. Starting with the Bengals and the Bills. Obviously, the big injury for the Bengals continues to be A.J. Green. He just got out of the walking boot last week, but he still hasn't played, so that means Andy Dalton's still going to rely on Tyler Boyd and John Ross to be the main targets there in that passing offense. And on the Buffalo side of things, Devin Singletary, the rookie, missed practice again on Wednesday with a hamstring injury that kept him out of Sunday's game. So that could mean, if this injury keeps persisting, that Devin Singletary will miss this upcoming week, and that'll mean a much bigger piece of the pie going to Frank Gore again. So not super big news for either of those teams. And, of course, the A.J. Green injury is already known, but just something to keep an eye on there. For our Lions, who will be going to the Eagles, good news for the Lions. Most people are back. The only player who might miss the third game is looking like it might be Deshaun Hand. Taylor Decker, Gerard Davis, they're all back. C.J. Moore was also limited practice, but Rashawn Melvin was a full go. So, it's looking pretty optimistic for the Lions in terms of injuries. And then the flip side of that, you have the Eagles, who they're seemingly the walking dead after that beating they took from Atlanta. Everybody's kind of beat up. Carson Wentz, of course, came back into the game, but he got beat up in that game. Deshaun Jackson isn't going to be playing and going to apparently miss multiple weeks. There's a chance Alshon Jeffrey misses multiple weeks. They're beat up. So favorable for the Lions, Joe. As we mentioned, they're certainly going to have an opportunity on Sunday, considering I want to say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 players listed on Wednesday's injury report for the Eagles. A lot of them starters, so they're banged up, and the Lions are relatively healthy.
25% of your roster.
Yeah, and the Lions are relatively healthy, so that bodes well for us heading into Sunday's game. Moving on to some of the other action we have on Sunday, you have the Jets taking on the Patriots. Of course, the Jets just assigned their second quarterback to IR, Trevor Siemian. He's done for the season with his injury. Luke Falk will be in the starting role there. And a familiar face they signed off of free agency, David Fales, joining as the new backup quarterback for the Jets. Quinnen Williams and C.J. Mosley are also expected to play in the game, but they have been a little bit limited in practice this week. But I think everything that I'm seeing out of the Jets is that they are expected to play on Sunday against New England. On the Patriots side of things, they do have some injuries to the offensive line. They did just lose one of their tackles, Isaiah Wynn, who just got placed on IR with a foot injury. Tom Brady was limited in practice on Wednesday, but he's Tom Brady, and he's, they're probably just giving him a little bit of a break. So nothing too crazy going on the Patriots side of things, but certainly for the Jets, not an ideal situation, down to your third string quarterback. But good news is they should have two of their better defensive players back for the Sunday matchup against the Patriots. Taking a look at the Raiders and the Vikings, both Tyrell Williams and running back Josh Jacobs were limited in practice on Wednesday. Williams is dealing with a hip pointer, and then I want to say I can't remember specifically if it's a knee or an ankle for Jacobs, but I think they'll probably both end up being a go in the game. It's just going to be kind of difficult, especially for Tyrell Williams, because he's going to be going up against the Vikings. He's going to be seeing a lot of Xavier Rhodes, who is one of the best corners in the NFL. And if you're, having issues with your hip, it makes it kind of difficult to run routes and get separation against a corner that's already pretty good. Trent Brown, the offensive tackle, also missed practice with a knee injury, but according to what John Gruden said, he's hopeful that he'll be ready to play in the game, and that really rounds out the injury portion for the Raiders. Offensive lineman Richie Incognito, though, did rejoin the team following his suspension and is expected to suit up for the Raiders on Sunday against the Vikings. Taking a look at what we got going on the Minnesota side of things. Luckily for them, it's not many of their starters who have injuries. About the only person of real note is Mike Hughes, one of their corners. He was a full participant in practice on Wednesday, so he should be back on Sunday. So he's probably the guy that Anthony Barr is also listed on there with a groin injury, but he was limited in practice, but should be a go for the game on Sunday as well. Looking at what could be a pretty exciting game, Joe, and of course we haven't made our picks yet for game of the week, but this could certainly be up there for contention for either of us. The Ravens at the Chiefs. Two teams inside of your power rankings for the top five. Could be very interesting to see what happens there. On the injury front, Mark Andrews, the tight end, did not practice on Wednesday. He's dealing with a foot issue. Hopefully we'll have an update there for you tomorrow when we do our fantasy focus about whether or not he's likely to be a go come Sunday, because he did have a pretty big fantasy football week in week 2. And then on the Chiefs side of things, obviously Tyreek Hill still hasn't come back to practice, and there isn't word yet about how long he's going to be out. But the Chiefs backfield also dealing with a couple of injuries to slow them down, both Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy missing practice on Wednesday, dealing with some injuries there. Taking a look at the next game, and Joe, we both doubted Indianapolis last week as they took on the Titans, who are playing tonight. They are dealing with some injuries. Darius Leonard, their pretty standout rookie linebacker from last year, he was placed in the concussion protocol. He missed practice on Wednesday, so it's unsure whether or not he's going to be a go on Sunday. Marlon Mack, the running back, was also held out of practice with a calf injury. And their star wide receiver, T.Y. Hilton, was limited in practice due to a quad injury. So, I mean, out of those three players, T.Y. Hilton's probably got the best shot of playing on Sunday against the Falcons. But those are two big names for the Colts there in Leonard and Mack, Joe. Certainly could impact the outcome of that game on Sunday against the Falcons.
Yeah, Mack's been having a successful season thus far, and he's probably hoping for good recovery.
Yep, hopefully he can get back on the field soon, because he has been, I know, rather exciting. And even last year when he started to break onto the scene, he certainly contributes a lot to that offense. And on the Atlanta side of things, obviously their offensive line is beat up. They've already lost a couple. They lost their first-round pick, Lindstrom, the guard for the season. He's on IR. Some more bad news for them as Caleb McGarry, another offensive tackle, missed practice on Wednesday. And then the other big injury is their punter, Matt Bosher. He's dealing with a groin injury. It made Matt Bryant take over kickoff duties against the Eagles last week, something he doesn't normally do. So they may be forced to go down to a second-string punter this week, as Bosher is still trying to recover from that groin injury. Taking a look at the Broncos and the Packers, really the only thing on the Broncos side of things is Emmanuel Sanders, who was limited in practice. It'll be interesting to see if he's a go. He's been he's kind of been the only bright spot in what's been kind of a lackluster Broncos offense. So definitely, if he's not a go for Sunday, it's going to hurt them quite a bit. And then on the Packers side of things, the only real big injury is Jimmy Graham, who didn't catch a pass in week 2. Important to note, he is dealing with a groin injury. So, really, the only 2 injuries of note in that game. So, for the most part, you're going to see a pretty healthy Broncos and Packers team square off on Sunday. Taking a look at the Dolphins, who will be traveling to the Cowboys. Obviously, the Dolphins are what they are. They are in full tank mode at this point. They traded Minka Fitzpatrick to the Steelers for a first-round pick. On the injury side of things, they're relatively healthy. The only 2 players that missed practice were Albert Wilson, a wide receiver, and Rashad Jones, who I believe is a corner. So they're already tanking, so their injuries aren't all that important. On the Dallas side of things,
sorry, I'm trying to kill a spider.
No worries. You got Xavier Rhodes, who's out with an ankle sprain, and he's expected to a high ankle sprain. Sorry, be specific, and he's expected to miss about 6 weeks due to that. Also, Michael Gallup, who was having a really impressive start to the season. He just had surgery done, so he's going to miss at least 2 to 4 weeks because they were doing some. I guess they were trimming his meniscus. I've heard of definitely meniscus tears before, Joe, but I've never heard of a procedure to trim the meniscus. Certainly not a doctor, but apparently, according to what I'm seeing from Ian Rappaport, he should be missing about 2 to 4 weeks, Michael Gallup, due to that procedure. And then the other news for Dallas isn't on the injury side of the things. Robert Quinn's suspension is over and could be returning this weekend for the Cowboys as they look to punish what is a pretty awful Dolphins team. Next up, we have the Giants and the Buccaneers. And, of course, I think the biggest storyline for the Giants, Joe, it's the end of an era, seemingly. We may have seen our last game, unless Daniel Jones gets hurt. We might have seen our last game with Eli Manning behind center for the Giants. They're officially handing over the starting job to that rookie Daniel Jones. What are your thoughts there, Joe, as the Giants, after an 0-2 start, decide to move on to the rookie?
I think it's all right. I don't think the Giants are going to be competitive this season. Eli's, had a Hall of Fame career, 2 Super Bowls against the Patriots, and he's put up yardage, he's put up touchdowns, and he's been a good, effective quarterback. And it's just unfortunate the last couple of years, or the last however many years since they've been out of playoff contention, they've been a really bad football team. So, there's not much that Eli's playing for.
Mm-hmm.
So, I like the move, trying to change the culture and get experience to your young quarterback.
Yeah, I think I'm in that same boat. Obviously, Eli won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants. He had a lot of success there. It's always sad to see a quarterback, or whether it's a quarterback or whatever position they're playing, someone who has been so prominent in the sport, seeing them sort of go from being at the top of their game to unfortunately getting down to that like twilight of their career. It unfortunately hasn't been a very graceful end to Eli Manning's career. They've been, as to your point, they've been bad the last few seasons, and not all of that is his fault. Clearly, it takes a team to be successful, but certainly his play hasn't been at the level that there was a time where people were talking about Eli Manning being one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. I feel like for the last 3 or 4 years, it's been a pretty easy statement to say that he hasn't been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
He's been, kind of devalued as a quarterback. Although he's had success in his career, the last 3 or 4 seasons, he's been really not rated very high as a quarterback.
Yeah, question for you, Joe. Do you think over the course of his career, do you think Eli did enough to get into the Hall of Fame, or do you think he is a 2-time Super Bowl champion and he was a Super Bowl MVP? I think that's enough to carry him in, just from my point of view. But do you think he gets into Canton with his career?
When evaluating, I would think they would look at total touchdowns, total yardage, total wins, win-loss record, TD to interception ratio, the two Super Bowl wins against the Patriots, an undefeated Patriots squad that season. That's got to boost up his legacy score. So, there's that, the MVP of a Super Bowl, and just having his last name being Manning with Peyton going in, and the history of the NFL through the Mannings. I would think that they would both be in the Hall of Fame. Although he doesn't have Peyton's numbers, he's got the same amount of Super Bowl wins that Peyton Manning has, and probably played better in the 2 Super Bowl wins that Manning has, Eli, than the 2 wins that Peyton had in the Super Bowl. So not that goes into account or anything, but yeah, I think when you evaluate the guy's career, you look at how many people have done that, and there's not too many. So I think that he would get the bid. Maybe not first ballot, maybe second ballot. On a year where there's not as many, perennial players or something. But I can definitely see him getting in.
Yeah, and interesting to note, you mentioned one of the criteria for evaluating whether or not he got in was his overall record. I do know that he's sitting currently at a 50, the ratio anyways is 50-50 wins to losses. I'm not sure what the exact, want to say it's like 116 to 116 or something like that is what I heard the other day when I was driving home on the ticket. But he's got that perfect balanced record of just as many wins to just as many losses.
Well, then you want to look at it and you say, well, if Stafford wins a Super Bowl in his time with Detroit, he's got to be a Hall of Famer with his numbers, even though you look at the win-loss record, and most likely it's going to be more losses than it is wins. But, to win a Super Bowl as a quarterback in Detroit would definitely give you a notch to be in the Hall of Fame. But I guess if you're playing for the Giants and you have, other quarterbacks, 2 Super Bowls, Mannings, then you can kind of be a little bit more subjective to the win-loss record. But, different criteria for different situations, I would think.
Yeah, certainly. Whoever the quarterback is, when and if Detroit gets that first Super Bowl win, I think that certainly is going to help elevate them in terms of the their Hall of Fame resume. I think there's certainly something to say about being the first quarterback for a franchise to help bring that title home. And I can see there my dad's been giving us some updates. Unfortunately, we both went with Tennessee in the game. According to him, the Jacksonville Jaguars have scored twice, so it's currently 14-0 is what he's alleging in that game against the Titans. So we'll have to see. Hopefully our picks can turn it around, Joe. Quickly, just to move through some of these other games here, because we do have just a few left. There's the Panthers at the Cardinals. There certainly seems to be something wrong with Cam Newton. He seemed to aggravate a foot injury week 2 against the Bucs. He did not practice on Wednesday. If he's not a go against the Cardinals, that means backup QB Kyle Allen would be starting. Something to keep an eye on, and hopefully we'll have an update tomorrow about his status heading into Sunday. David Johnson gave the Cardinals a little bit of a scare last week in week 2. It looked like he might have broken his wrist, but according to Cliff Kingsbury, the head coach there for the Cardinals, he is all good for week 3. Moving on to the Steelers at the 49ers. Obviously, the big news on the Steelers front, Ben Roethlisberger out for the season. Mason Rudolph in as the starting QB. They also did sign Delvin Hodges to be their new backup to Rudolph. Luckily for the Steelers, James Conner, their running back, he didn't practice on Wednesday, but he seems to have avoided any serious injury because he did get knocked out briefly of the game on Sunday. And it looked, the thought was that he might have to miss some time. It looks like he should be good to go on Sunday against the 49ers. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Dolphins, the Steelers are bringing in Minkah Fitzpatrick, who they traded for from the Dolphins. On the 49er side, he's expected, I think he's listed technically as probable. The real big injury on San Francisco's side currently is D Ford. He did not practice on Wednesday. He's got a quad and a knee issue that he's been dealing with, I guess, all summer. But I think the thought is that he may be able to play through that on Sunday. Looking at the Saints and Seahawks side of things, obviously, just like the Steelers, starting quarterback Drew Brees was knocked out. That means Teddy Bridgewater should be the starter here in week 2. Although it is interesting to note that head coach Sean Payton has also been hyping up Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill, the Saints have kind of been using him as sort of the utility player on offense, lining him up in a variety of positions. He called Taysom Hill, based off of his ability, the next Steve Young. So, I think everyone is expecting Teddy Bridgewater to be the starter in relief of Drew Brees. But interesting there that Sean Payton referring to him as the next Steve Young there, Taysom Hill, could be something to keep an eye on about who, maybe that means heading into the game against the Seahawks, they might try a little bit of a 2-quarterback system, see who has the hot hand. Certainly something to keep your eyes on moving forward, especially if you're a fantasy football aficionado. Whether or not you need to have Teddy Bridgewater on your team or maybe Taysom Hill's the guy you need to take a look at. There were also a couple of wide receiver issues with the Saints. Tre'Quan Smith missed Wednesday's practice, and Ted Ginn Jr. was limited. He's been dealing with, I believe it's been a sickness is what caused him to miss last week's game. So hopefully he's getting healthier. On the Seattle side of things, the Seahawks are pretty healthy heading into week 3. And it might be the first week we get to see the return of Ziggy Ansah. He was a full participant in practice last week, but they did hold him out of the week 2 game. So week 3 might be the first week we get to see Ziggy Ansah suit up for the Seahawks. Running through these last couple of games, Texans at Chargers, Laramie Tunsil for Houston and DeAndre Hopkins were both limited on practice on Wednesday, but they're both expected to play against the Chargers. Looking at the Chargers side of things, the Chargers kind of inexplicably against the Lions, Joe, decided to rely on their punter Ty Long to be their place kicker. Luckily for them, their actual place kicker, Michael Badgley, should be back here in week 3, but certainly an interesting choice by them to go with the punter instead of bringing in a temporary place kicker, one that we benefited from, Joe, last week.
Yeah.
So he should be back. And then with Hunter Henry, he also had an injury to his kneecap and will miss some time here. The Chargers went ahead and signed Lance Kendricks, adding him to the roster to try and fill that void there for Hunter Henry. The Rams and the Browns, Aaron Donald was forced to leave that week 2 win over the Saints. He did come back in that game. He was limited on practice on Wednesday, but I think he'll be a go here against the Browns. Tyler Higbee and Austin Blythe both missed practice as well with injuries, and they are not as certain to play against Cleveland. They're considered day-to-day, so something to keep an eye on there. Joe, I don't know if you saw it in the Cleveland game, but David Njoku, the tight end, he got flipped head over, he flipped in the air off the hit. During that he suffered a wrist injury and he got placed in the concussion protocol. That was one of the more intense hits I've seen in quite some time. Did you catch that one at all?
I didn't catch that one.
It was rough, and so uncertain if he will be playing this week. Of course, he's got to make it through the concussion protocol before he can be cleared to play. And hopefully we'll see him back on the field healthy sooner rather than later. The last game of the week is the Monday Night Football matchup between the Chicago Bears and the Washington Redskins. Taking a look at the Chicago sides of things, defensive tackle Belial Nichols is really the big guy. He's listed as doubtful for the Bears heading into week 3. He's dealing with a hand injury. And then there's Washington. And they might just be I know we talked about the Eagles being banged up. Did you know, Joe, that heading into week 3, Washington has 10 players listed on their IR? 10 players.
Wow.
They are beat up.
That's going to cause them to, substitute some of these starting roles and some of these players that were key components in the roster. When they first came out with the starting roster for the season, now they're going to have to turn to practice squad players, free agents, fill the void, and hope the guys can get in the system during the season and pick up, whatever they can to try to be effective. It's definitely detrimental when you have injuries, especially 10 on IR.
Yeah, there's the 53-man roster, so you figure you have 10 of 53. Trim off that 3 and turn it into 10 out of 50 players. That's 20% of your roster right there just on IR. So it's a hard thing to hard thing to prepare for, and it's unfortunately gonna cause a lot of that next man up there for Washington. There is a little bit of good injury news for Washington. Both Jordan Reed and Jonathan Allen returned to practice on Wednesday. They've been I know Jordan Reed hasn't played yet this season. I'm not sure if Jonathan Allen has seen any regular season action, but for a team that's already lost 10 players, it's good to see that they're getting at least a couple guys back to practice. So it's a busy week, a lot of big injuries. Obviously some of the biggest ones are what happened to the Saints and the Steelers. Your starting franchise quarterback going down with an injury, can have a huge impact on your season. And before we sign off for today's episode, Joe, I just wanted to get your opinion on which injury do you think is going to be which QB injury is going to be more impactful? Do you think the Steelers or the Saints are going to be able to cope better without their starting quarterback?
Definitely the Saints. I think, you look at Pittsburgh, they didn't start the season well, and Ben Roethlisberger's getting to that point to where he's, not competing for a division or not competing for a championship. And when you look at New Orleans, you say, well, New Orleans can substitute in Teddy Bridgewater, a former starter in the NFL. And they got this other guy you're calling the next Steve Young. So that's a better situation. The injury that's going to hurt the team the most is probably going to be for the Steelers. But the one that's going to, what was the question?
Which team would be able to cope better without their starter, the Steelers or the Saints?
Yeah, definitely the Saints. They have better backups, and their overall team is better than Pittsburgh's at this time.
Yeah, I think they have a better supporting cast. You still have Michael Thomas, you still have Alvin Kamara. There are weapons around them. Now, if the Steelers still had Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell around Mason Rudolph, along with Juju Smith-Schuster and the rest of the cast they currently have, I think they would certainly be in a better place. But because they don't have those bona fide superstars around this guy that's being thrust into action, I think certainly the Saints should have a easier time dealing with it. And plus, the Saints should be getting back Drew Brees at some point. I believe he's projected to miss somewhere in the 4 to 6 weeks range with the surgery to his wrist. So he'll at least be coming back at some point this season. Ben Roethlisberger is certainly out for the rest of the season. So I think it certainly is a more favorable situation for the Saints. Well, that's going to do it for today's injury roundup and roster transaction news. If you are interested, please join us again tomorrow night. We're going to do our fantasy football focus since it is a Friday, keeping that alliteration alive. And there may be some, I mentioned there were a couple guys that we might get some more information about whether or not they practice tomorrow. Cam Newton, is he going to be available for Sunday or not? Certainly can be worthwhile if you're going to be setting your fantasy football team up to check in tomorrow night. And we'll also do some recommendations for who you should start and sit. So if you are a fantasy fan, check in. And I can see at least two of the people watching they're two of our fellow Gridiron League members, my father and Jeffrey Raymond. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and for everybody, just want to thank you for watching the video today. If you did enjoy the show, please do help the channel grow. The best way you can help support us is hit that like button on the video. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing. We're working towards our goal of hitting 100 subscribers, so if you haven't done so yet, it really does help us out, so please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to be kept up to date when all our latest videos are going live, you can go ahead and ring that bell there next to the subscribe button, and it'll send you alert when we're going live tomorrow night with our fantasy football focus. Until tomorrow, I'm Kevin Marheine. He's Joe Wilmot. We'll see you during the next video.